Thank you for inviting me, ladies and gentlemen. Very happy to be here. Yes, the title is just that. Serious media can save the world, but can anything save serious media? My starting point is this: serious times require serious media. By this I mean media who publish correct and relevant information, who do balanced analysis, etc. Unfortunately, the serious media are getting weaker just as we need them to be strong, thereby making the seriousness of the times even more serious. There are many paradoxes in this field. Paradox one is this: and I suspect that goes for many of you too, I am better informed, I feel, today than I was 20 years ago when I had to wait for printed newspapers for my information. While it is probably also true that a vast part of our populations are less well informed. This is yet another of these signs of polarization that Per mentioned, social, political, economic, that is plaguing the world. So don't get me wrong, I love the digital revolution. The information revolution, or the digital revolution, is the biggest change to mankind since Gutenberg inventing the printing press. It changes everybody's life. The information revolution is driven by a combination of technology and deregulation. This is a revolution to be welcomed. It enables democratization of information and knowledge. Pyramids and hierarchies are turned upside down. The information revolution is fabulous, and it's a privilege just to be able to witness it, much less to get to play a small part in it. But this would not be a true revolution if it was also not also riddled with complications, contradictions, uncertainties, and numerous detestable features. Let me remind you of a few of the less attractive sides of the digital upheaval. First, it has obviously strengthened democracy that internet offers more or less everyone a chance to express themselves on every issue. But I ask you, what does it do to democracy if everybody is talking and nobody is listening? Is the current number of listeners proportionate to the number of speakers? Yes, I know that bloggers like to quote the famous Roman Cicero, or Cicero, depending on how you pronounce him, who said, "I do not count the people who listen to me, I weigh them." But still, will the characteristics of the new democracy be to speak your mind rather than listening and bringing other voices into the debate? Second, and worse still, is that not only do all opinions grow in cyberspace, all facts or factoids grow there too. You don't have to spend many minutes on the internet to find pages that profess to confirm the most bizarre views of the world. It's a kind of information Lego where that allows even the most outlandish of groups and individuals to build their own rickety universe, often in order to confirm views or prejudices that they already possess. But information is only informative if it is intended to be correct and disseminated with the purpose to inform, not to misinform. This is why journalists, I believe, will be needed in the future too. And information turns into knowledge only if it is part of a meaningful context, if the context is analytical, critical, and honest, and if enlightenment is its purpose. This is why I believe honest editors will be needed in the future as well. Let me add a further complication that has been brought on by the digital revolution. This third effect, one is creating great worry and sweeping the world, is the death of newspapers and the demise of much of serious journalism. This is a serious change for anybody who believes that informed democracy is the preferred social and political system. I read a new study only yesterday, Serious One, 4,000 respondents, that show, made in Europe and North America, that shows that 63% of people under 35 get their prime news from social media. From social media. You know, social media are these institutions that produce no news. They, Facebook and Google are the prime examples, they publish news that traditional media have produced and paid for. Then Facebook and Google say it's for free, but you pay for it with your integrity and with increased vulnerabilities of societies. The European Parliament did the right thing when passing the Publish Rights Act 2 months ago. This means, as you, I'm sure, are aware, that it will be possible to get a small part of the payment for a link on a social medium going back to the original producer of the news item. You may ask yourself, why and how did this crisis for serious journalism happen? I will give you a couple of possible explanations. Old media, especially newspapers, severely underestimated the internet. Only 10 years ago, newspapers were great and profitable businesses. They grew fat, unresponsive, and overconfident. They especially underestimated the fact that the internet was about to take away almost their entire advertising base. Classified advertising for small items or housing is, of course, always more efficient on a searchable database than in a bulky newspaper. Thus, 5 years ago, Jeff Bezos of Amazon could buy the venerable Washington Post for a mere $250 million. Now, that may sound like a good deal of money for you and me, but it is, I assure you, nothing for the Washington Post or for Jeff Bezos. An average commercial airliner cost $250 million, and if you are in the market for an Airbus 380, you will have to pay the price of 2 Washington Posts. Are there any positive signs? Yes, there are. Old media is finally getting to grips with the situation. The New York Times, and indeed the Washington Post under Jeff Bezos, is changing for the better. New resources are coming in. They are going digital in a big way, but remaining serious in their tradition. On the television side, I believe that CNN, which I watch frequently, has never been better. And all these 3 media outlets are, of course, greatly helped by Donald Trump. Everything he talks about the failing New York Times, they get 500 new subscribers. And of course, similar developments are going on here. Several interesting changes in Germany, in the Nordic countries where I come from. So things are happening, good things are happening in the traditional media sector, but they have a long ways to go to catch up to where they used to be, say, only 10 years ago. Secondly, there are laudable new initiatives coming not out of the traditional media, but being born. One example is VilaWeb, owned by our friend Vicent Bartal, who is a member of the European Cultural Parliament. Another is The Correspondent in Holland, which is now opening an American outlet called The Correspondent. They're right now in the final days of a crowdfunding initiative that seems to be going very good. And there are many other such examples. But those of you in the audience who know me would, I suspect, be disappointed if I did not bring up public service broadcasting as perhaps the most important remedy remedy against the crisis for serious media. The concept of broadcasting to the entire public and in the interest of the public is a noble one, and it is, ladies and gentlemen, a European original. To inform, educate, and entertain, as the BBC Charter says. Strong, independent, and viable public service radio and television companies are true national assets. The new media landscape that I've talked about presents an even stronger case, in my view, for public service broadcasting on all platforms. I believe that public service could offer the public at least some remedies in all the three problem areas that I just mentioned, the problems with the digital revolution. First of all, public service broadcasters offer the kind of serious, independent, relevant, and accessible quality journalism and analysis that our societies need, but seem to be getting less and less of. And supplying, I'm preaching, of course, to the choir here, supplying this kind of serious, unbiased information and relevant content is what public service broadcasters do. This is our purpose, and we are the only ones who aim to do it for everyone. Public service makes the digital revolution into a democratic revolution. Of course, many other media companies have similar ambitions, and the good newspapers are not all dead yet, but the evidence that the commercial conditions for serious journalism and serious media are getting tougher, and we're only seeing the beginning of this development, I fear. One of the many paradoxes is that when fragmentation increases, the need and probably also the demand for its opposite will increase as well. Civilized societies will need a market square, a common denominator, an antidote to fragmentation, an arena for the relevant debates to all, and a source for reliable information for all. I could think of no better such arena and such a source than a strong, independent, broad-based public service system. And the good news in the midst of the bad is that the public tends, at least where I come from, to confirm this notion with their listening and viewing patterns. Public service in Sweden is by far the strongest broadcaster, both in radio and television. As I said, serious times call for serious media. We are the most trusted of all companies and institutions in our country. Not only do we by far outdo even every commercial media company in terms of trust, other pillars of society, such as the political parties, the police force, or parliament itself, hardly reach up to our knees in terms of credibility and trustworthiness. Thus, ladies and gentlemen, my main argument for public service is not ideological, but pragmatic. That is, if you don't regard democracy and society's knowledge level as ideologies. Without public service, we would have less informed and less critical citizens and a less coherent society. Now, this is the real world, and therefore public service is being severely challenged as we speak, just as it is needed more than ever. Again, there are several explanations. One is that some of the political forces at work are more closely aligned with the populist nature of social media than with serious analytical journalism. Hungary is a good example, Poland, of course, and the United States of America. These political forces ought to, in my mind, ponder the yet another paradox that I have named the public relations paradox. It goes like this. If a public relations program, a PR program, turns into a public relations program, it will automatically cease to be a public relations program. There is a broadcasting version of this that goes like this. Any government that attempts to use the credibility of a public broadcaster to promote its own credibility will ultimately eliminate both its own credibility and the credibility of the broadcaster. A second observation regarding public service and why it's under such pressure right now is the faulty analysis of at least a part of the newspaper industry. And this, I think, right now is a particular danger. While the real enemies, as we've said, are Google and Facebook, who take their news and pay nothing for it and spread it for free. They have chosen to challenge the less formidable opponent that is public service. They are wrong, but they insist on blaming their own downward spiral on the existence of public service. This is wrong. Strong newspapers and strong public service actually go hand in hand. They drive each other. I could give you a couple of examples. The Nordic countries have still, even though we have the same downturn, we still have the highest readership of newspapers in the world, together with Japan, and we arguably have the strongest public service systems as well. If you go to Southern Europe, the opposite is the case. Public service in Italy and Spain are essentially in shambles, and the newspapers are nearly not existing anymore. The United States of America is another good example. The newspaper crisis is more severe in the US than in Europe. And in the US, public service broadcasting is hardly a factor at all in the market. But, as in the case of our neighbor Denmark, populism and faulty analysis join together in order to severely limit public service broadcasting in the vain hope that they will actually save newspapers. It will not. There I will end with the famous Chinese quote, "May you live in interesting times." Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Joanson. Please, just one question. Just one question.
Okay. Do you think that this problem of not existing print press anymore is a generation problem? You just mentioned that in Scandinavia is more a newspaper is published as in South Europe, for example. Is it not to do that Scandinavian population is a bit older than the South European population? I think it's inevitable. The US said about 20 years ago that the newspaper will not exist anymore, but they're still there. I live in a very little village in Italy, and in every door will bring both the newspaper because they're just old generations. They like it. It's convenient to get it.
I'm sure that you are right, that it's a generational issue. On the other hand, that is not the crucial change. The sign of serious media is not that it is printed on paper, but it is attitude towards information. So I mean, I subscribe to 3 digital newspapers, 2 Swedish and the Washington Post. I never read it on paper, but I read it, and it's the journalism, the culture of these media outlets that is decisive, not the medium on which it is being distributed. And the same, by the way, goes for public service media. I mean, one of the worst things that public service opponents try to do to public service is to limit its distribution to the airwaves. If they were to be able to tie the definition of public service to carrying around your radio set or having a TV, then that would be the death. Of course, it should be digitally distributed everywhere.
An amendment by
Just an addition, sir, because this is the most exciting topic to me, and it's a continuation to that question that was asked. Definitely you cannot underrate or ignore the environment. I come from Bulgaria, and you will understand the question very, very well. It's even further south than Italy and Spain. The environment itself the role of the political factors, the political parties, if you do have a really strong civil society which can make its choices and can impose how media will kind of take its course to be more readable, then probably we would have a situation, if not identical, at least closer to that of the Scandinavian countries. But I think that the public environment is of huge importance.
I couldn't agree more. And that also means that it's very hard to fix because it's built on long traditions. In Sweden, for instance, I've been having all sorts of roles in public service, from cub reporter to foreign correspondent to director general, etc. And I'm often asked, don't you get a lot of political pressure to influence broadcasting? And the true answer is, I did get some when I was 20 years old and starting out, when I was sort of weak. But as the head of the organization, I never got any politician who would try to influence me. And why is that? It is the embarrassment factor. It would be terribly embarrassing if it were to be known that the Prime Minister had taken his telephone and tried to call the head of the public service organization. Ask Per Stenbeck and any other Finn. They had a case like that for a couple of years ago where the Prime Minister tried to exert his influence and he lost his credibility because of it. But this is, any medium is not built overnight. And this is why we shouldn't be overly arrogant, because we have a tradition that has led over 50 years to independent media. It is not something you could teach to Bulgaria or anybody else. It's something that civil society, as you rightly say, has to fight for over a long time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we go for the lunch. But, well, it's supposed to be continuation for 1 hour, but be very short. We have to try to continue our session, afternoon session at 2:20. Bon appetit.
Guys, 1 minute before you go out. Sorry, I'm coming to get on GP. First of all, I ask you please, everyone should keep belonging to the team, her.